Well, welcome. This is actually our 8th meeting of the Annexation Task Force, and I had I'm Rick Kiley, City Council Chair, and I think I'll have the council members or the task force members introduce themselves. Greg Starnes is on his way into town from Brookings. He was out of town today. Jeff Davis had a business emergency, so we're hoping that Jeff will be able to attend, but that's up in the air. And Tina, for sure, Tina Haraldson had a business obligation that took her out of town as well. So we know with certainty that Tina will not be here this evening. We're hoping that Jeff can make it, and Greg Starnes will definitely be here. He just said he would be a few minutes late, and as a good traffic safety advocate, I advised him to take his time and to drive safe. So anyway, let's start down here with Matt.
Matt Metzger, South Sycamore Avenue.
Marshall Salberg, Sioux Falls City Council.
And again, I'm Rick Kiley, Sioux Falls City Council.
Greg Neitzert, City Council, Northwest District.
And as I was stating, our first meeting was held back April 11th. Where has the time gone? I kind of wish we were back at April and looking at spring and summer ahead of us than what we have that lies in front of us now. But then we met again April 26th. We had meetings in May, June, July, August, September. We conducted our open house, and now here today our October meeting number 8. And we're going to the agenda is out there, and I'm going to make some preliminary open remarks, and then Director Cooper is going to present on the city side. And during the evening, the task force will be doing quite a bit of discussion on various topics, because as you know, we had our open house last month, and so we took the input. So now we're going to take and we're going to discuss any of that input, as well as maybe some input from task force members themselves as well, and come up with our final recommendations to bring forward to the Sioux Falls City Council at some point next month. And that's something that we'll discuss a little bit later on this evening. So Director Cooper, if you want to start, go ahead and start the slideshow presentation. And I've got one slide on there myself, which I have covered some of that information already, if not all.
Yes, you have.
I believe I did.
Okay. Thank you. And again, I'm Mike Cooper with Planning and Building Services. Thanks for being here tonight, and thanks for the audience to be here as well. So tonight, we're going to quickly go through a review of the policy recommendations that the task force has already considered. We're going to give an overview of the open house comments, and then some additional discussion about possible modifications or additions to the initial recommendations. So I'm going to start out by quickly going through the previous policy recommendations that we voted on back in September. The first one talks about pockets of unannexed land are being created through the voluntary annexation process. And we talked about a recommendation as far as communications with property owners. The terms that are highlighted on this particular slide, I'll talk about a little bit later on. There was some question about a better definition or clarification of what these terms mean. A continuation of that was it's difficult for staff to know when to approach a property owner about annexation. So again, we put together some recommended triggers that we call these of when potential annexations would be initiated by the city. And the highlighted terms I'll talk about later on as well. Next, we talked about the financial impact of annexation is too great, and what can we do to minimize that. We spent a lot of time presenting some alternatives in terms of minimum requirements for various types of utilities and roads. And this is something that the task force was in support of. So we talked about water service, sanitary sewer, roads, drainage, sidewalks, street lights, and sump pump requirements. So again, I'm just kind of going over what you as a task force have already taken a look at. And then again on communication, what can we do to improve communication regarding notifications? If property owners or neighbors are involved in a pre-annexation agreement, or if there's adjacent land that's being annexed, or if there's future capital projects that might be of interest to property owners, this is where that slide is addressing that communication process. So that takes us to our open house that was completed. We received quite a bit of public input through comment cards, emails, and face-to-face discussion. A summary of that public input is going to be, if it is already available, on our Annexation Task Force website. And so my next slide is to give you kind of a summary of some of the reoccurring comments that the task force might want to talk about tonight. Regarding enhancing the communication process, again, we talked about what can we do as a staff to update property owners occasionally if there is a pre-annexation agreement on file, make sure they know how to get a copy of that agreement. And then if there's going to be some action potentially by the city council on a city-initiated annexation, that we would do the notification by registered or certified mail, but we would have some type of proof of delivery to the property owner not less than 30 days prior to that date. So bullet points 1 and 2, staff is in support of those comments. And then bullet point 3, because of the requirement that's laid out by state law as far as the notification process, what we had recommended would be that we would change that to say staff will testify if there is a potential annexation hearing. We would testify that there's an assurance that the property owner has responded to whatever notification we sent out. So the bottom line is we want some type of an assurance that if there is going to be a public hearing, that the property owners are aware of it and they've responded to that notification. And we can talk about that as we go through. This is a follow-up about clarifying the terms that are in some of the previous recommendations. The term fully developed is defined as an area that's used extensively for residential, urban, recreational, or conservation parklands, commercial, industrial, institutional, or governmental purpose, or an area that's undergoing development for any of these purposes. So it could include a wetland area or a detention pond area that's adjacent to an existing development or a part of a development. And then the term development is defined as the construction, reconstruction, conversion, structural alteration, relocation, or enlargement of any structure, any mining, excavation, landfill or land disturbance, or any use or extension of the use of land. And that's a term, that's a definition that we've researched from other sources. And then the question about is the term should suggested or mandatory? And based on our legal team, the word should is synonymous with must.
Should we just use must? Legal team.
Danny, do you want to respond to that? So then why don't we just use the word must instead of should? Come on up. Good interaction.
Well, I think if you want it to be must, you should use must and not use should. So it's obvious to everybody that it's a mandatory requirement. So the definition of should is synonymous with must, but in legal cases, there's always a dispute as to whether should really means must or not. So I would recommend if you want to require something and not make it an option, use the word must, not should.
Thank you.
The term impacted, there was a question about a definition of that, and that's used in reference to CIP or the capital program. And this term is meant to refer to improvements that will directly influence the available services to a property, whether it's water, sewer, or street access. There was a question about the term adjacent when referring to land next to a property that's going to be annexed or that's considered for annexation. So the term adjacent is defined as lying near, close, or contiguous, and abutting is touching or joining at the edge.
Are we using adjacent?
And we decided on a recommendation is abutting. Abutting is a better definition to use. And it gets back to abutting is just a better term to use in terms of the proximity to land.
Where is it used in the first place? Adjacent, or where is it used?
We had that under, let's see. I'm going to go back to one of the first slides. That goes back to policy recommendation about the triggers. I'm going to go backwards. Excuse me a second. If you look at trigger number 2, the unannexed property is currently adjacent versus abutting, but you can, let's have that discussion.
I was just going to say,
If
maybe
you have a preference.
just for the benefit maybe of the audience, and you can confirm with me, typically when it comes to zoning or public works and things like that, abutting would mean touching, like two lots that physically touch.
Yep.
But adjacent would be, for an example, if you have my house and then across the street from me, there's a right-of-way in between our two.
Yep.
We are adjacent, but we're not abutting.
Yep.
And so I think, just for clarity for people,
So do you have a recommendation on which of those two you would think would be better?
I would think adjacent would
Okay.
make sense
That's what
personally.
we currently
but
have on the slide.
I would take
I like
feedback.
adjacent. I thought adjacent was a better word.
Okay,
Yeah, and I'm in favor of that as well.
so that would not require any change to your previous
Okay.
vote. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the other comment that we heard at the open house was, again, this issue of the financial impact to property owners. And so we put together this slide that we thought would be interesting to compare based on the recommendation for the minimum standards, just in terms of 100-foot of frontage on a lot. Now, a 100-foot lot is maybe typically bigger than a normal city lot, but maybe smaller than a rural residential lot. So it kind of goes in between the medium. But if you just take 100 feet of street frontage and you're going to put water and sewer in the right-of-way, for new development, the standards would cost you $22,600 for assessments. For paved road, curb and gutter, utilities, sidewalk, streetlights. Versus for existing rural neighborhood standards, the assessment would be $8,500 to put in water and sewer only. So the difference is about 1/3 versus of savings, 2/3 of savings by using those rural residential standards. So as we presented that to the task force and we went through that discussion, we as staff felt that that was a consensus of trying to reduce the financial impact on potential annexation. So if a development or a single property owner wanted to be annexed into the city and they were trying to minimize the financial burden, this would be a pretty significant way that we could do that. So that's a comparison of those two costs for 100 foot of street frontage.
And just to clarify, so
Yeah.
that's the infrastructure that goes, that's not connecting it to the house then, correct? So the homeowner would still have that
Yes.
expense?
Yeah.
And how much is that again approximately?
Do you remember roughly? We don't have that apparently. Okay, all right. We'll get that for you. Yeah, this is just
Homeowner would be responsible 100% for that cost then?
for the service lines from the main to the house. Yep. And that might be more of a range depending on the situation, because if it's a existing rural home that has a septic tank, the service connections might have to be designed differently than they would for a normal new home.
Yeah, I was just trying to get an idea of what that cost would be to figure out what it would be for
Okay.
everybody, so.
I think we'll try to keep checking on that before the meeting is over tonight. This goes back to the previous policy recommendation by the task force about these triggers. For us, I think this is going to be the most beneficial outcome of the task force, is looking at what would potentially trigger a city-initiated annexation. And I think by having these criteria pretty well defined, it's going to give the city staff more of a direction, as well as property owners. But as we've heard from people, and as we've done a little more research of other states that have gone through some similar discussion and even legislation, we came across this proposed criteria number 5 that we would like you to consider tonight about adding. And that is that the city, another trigger would be that the city has no reasonable means of physical access for the provision of services to adjacent property. So in other words, if a property owner is petitioning to be annexed, and there's going to be an unannexed parcel that is going to limit the potential of extension of services to that petition property, it's within our service area, it's within our growth area. That may be one potential trigger in addition or along with some of these other criteria. So again, we picked up on this from other states that have gone through some legal cases on primarily justifying when and if a city could potentially initiate an annexation.
And just to be clear, Director Cooper, the adjacent property is a property that is within the city, or
is
at least
being
it wish-
petitioned to be in the city, yes.
desires to be within the city.
Yep.
Okay. You want to take discussion on that item at this point in time? Councilor Neitzer, it looked like you were.
Yeah, so I'm just chewing on this a little bit. So if you need to extend services through a property, you're going to need to get an easement. And annexed or not, it's really more of a negotiation between the city and the landowner of how much that easement is worth, and the city would pay some amount and you would get an easement. Otherwise, there would have to be some sort of and it rarely happens, but it can happen, a lawsuit, for example, for an eminent domain to say that we've got to put the sewer line through here because that's the low spot in the land. So I guess I understand it's an or it's a, it doesn't mean you're automatically going to annex,
Right.
but I don't.
Yes. None of these triggers would say automatic.
Yeah, that automatic.
Yep.
It would
That's
be a
not the
criteria.
intent.
I don't know that I see that annexing does anything to change the negotiation, except though I guess it could be leverage where you could say, you can give us this or we'll start a forcible annexation. I mean, it could be a negotiation tool, but annexed or not, it's really about getting the easement, I think, unless I'm missing something.
Well, the only other scenario would potentially be that if you are going to annex an existing development, then you could use the potential of the street right away rather than an easement to extend utilities. So
Sure.
it's
okay.
kind of unlikely, but we just thought it was kind of interesting to at least have that discussion about another potential trigger.
You would need that land annex to dedicate street right-of-way to put the utilities through? Is that what you're
You
getting
would
at?
need to have, yes, versus an easement.
Okay, because we wouldn't,
That's providing that there is an existing street.
Yes,
yeah,
right.
which,
So, I mean, the scenarios are
it,
pretty limited, but we just thought this would be one that we would throw at you for discussion purposes.
but it's important that, I guess, it's fair to say, obviously, this is not an automatic trigger. None of these are. It's just something that could be another one that maybe. Okay.
Yep.
Fair enough.
Any other discussion from the other members?
I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have a consensus on that, Matt? You believe so too? All right.
Okay.
Believe we have a consensus on that one, Director Cooper?
Okay. We also heard quite a bit of comments throughout this process and at the open house that the property owners are really wanting to maintain the character of their rural neighborhoods. And the question about if a property is annexed, is there going to be sidewalk required or not? And that question, the best that we can continue to answer that is that ADA requirements, whether inside or outside the city limits, are held to the same accessibility standards. And that's mandated by the federal government. So we wish that we could give more of a definitive answer, but I think it's going to be more on a case-by-case basis. But the second bullet point is that by adopting and incorporating these rural development standards, that will help property owners maintain their rural character. So that's one that we thought was important to highlight again. Along with the reduced impact, the financial impact came back again, and the question came up, is there a mechanism that if I'm annexed into the city and my property taxes are going to go up as we've told you before, could my property taxes increase potentially be used to pay for some of these infrastructure improvements? And based on, again, on our legal team research and state law, property tax incentives such as escrowing a percentage of tax increase for improvements could not be provided under current state law. So state law would have to be modified at the legislative process.
You know, one twist on that, and we had a comment on, and maybe Jeff had suggested this at one time, is a study be conducted to determine what the cost of the assessments are going to be and what the property tax income to the city is going to be, and then just net that amount against the taxes against the assessment as a way of reducing the assessment. So I understand you can't necessarily escrow the property tax funds, but if there's $500,000 worth of assessments against 10 properties, and those properties are going to pay $400,000 worth of property taxes to the city over 20 years, it would reduce the assessment to $100,000 or $10,000 per household, which I think is something for us to at least knock around a little bit.
And could I ask Danny to maybe respond to that again? Because Danny's the one that has done the research as far as what state law provides for or doesn't provide for currently.
Danny Brown, City Attorney's Office. You can take into consideration the determination of how much the city is going to contribute for assessments, or for improvements, I should say. So when somebody is assessed because of the city doing assessments or doing improvements to their property, the city can do a determination as to how much they want to put in and how much they should require the property owner to put in. And so if you wanted to come up with some policy that gave some consideration of what the increases in taxes might be ultimately, that could happen to where city staff or city administration could say, we realize that there's going to be a benefit in the future of a certain amount, and because of that, we're willing to pay a little bit more than maybe we would normally pay. That's possible, and that's certainly within the law. So what you were suggesting could be done.
Almost sounds like working some sort of a TIF program in this regard.
Yeah.
Well, anytime that you go forward with an assessment, the city has to determine what that assessment amount is going to be. Or I should say, anytime that there's going to be an annexation, the city has to determine how the improvements are going to be paid. And a lot of times those improvements are paid by assessment, maybe 100% by the landowner, maybe 80% by the landowner, or some other combination. So the state law allows the city to determine when there's an annexation, how much of that improvement is going to be paid by the owner and the city, whether all 50-50 or any combination of. It's open.
Can you remind us what the, as far as when you do when the study is done for the annexation and legally what the assessment can be based on? You know, is there any guidance in state law as to? Okay, then we'll hold for that.
Okay.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Danny.
Well, so before we move on,
Yep.
so that concept, you know, I don't know how we make that, the best way should we incorporate that into some type of task force recommendation, that the city consider that in determining the assessments, or you guys don't like the idea, period, but I think it's worth talking about a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
So could I just throw
Go
something
ahead.
out? So maybe I'm thinking wrong, but as I'm thinking about this, about equity, so equity for all citizens, maybe this is analogous, maybe it isn't. Let's say I have a piece of bare ground that's annexed into the city and I'm paying, you know, a piddly amount of property tax, and now I develop that and build a house on it. Now the property tax, or a commercial business, and the property tax goes up. And we have to put, you know, the developer puts in the infrastructure. I don't believe we provide any sort of a rebate to the developer, recognizing that by that development that, you know, the property tax is increasing over the years. They just have to pay full freight, you know. So I guess I'm just trying to think of if that's equitable. If my scenario is an analogy to your proposal, So.
You know, and I just thinking, again, off the top of my head, you know, I think it's something that we need to consider on a case-by-case basis, because the needs and the benefits to the city or to the property owner or owners can vary due to different circumstances. Obviously, if there's a benefit to the city, because going this way versus all the way around and then coming in from the backside, there's a greater benefit to the city. It could be considered obviously in that situation. Or if you have a terrible scenario where there's threat of failure of a sanitary sewer system or something of that nature, then there could be special consideration maybe taken there too. But I think it would be a case-by-case basis, and I don't know that we can apply one formula or policy, one size that fits all scenario, but how we could put that into a recommendation so that it would at least be considered going forward.
That's the toughest part. I mean, cost is obviously the main focus. We're trying to talk about that as well, but it's that trying to find something. We can't do a one-size-fits-all, but is there a way we can find 3, 4, 5 options? I don't know. But yeah, we keep hitting the wall on that, and we keep trying to talk about cost and reducing it. But I do like the idea. I mean, like you say, to keep batting it around and seeing if there's some way to work with that.
And I believe that, especially Director Cooper, you can address this, with especially in the pre-annexation agreements, that type of a negotiation is taking place, is it not?
Yeah, typically our pre-annexation agreements have outlined what future improvements will potentially be requested by the property owner once they are annexed, and how those would be financed.
Okay.
I would just, so I think it's really important, and it's been important to me the whole way through, of how do we, if this does happen, that it's, the ratios work. I've always talked about ratios. But again, with everything we think about, we have to also think about equity, and that includes all citizens, annexed or not. And because you could get into a situation where you do a certain thing, maybe in the unannexed, you know, the rural subdivisions, and then the developers who are building here in town already are saying, well, wait a second, you're paying for all of their infrastructure? Why don't we get a rebate? You know, so it's the equity that has to be balanced. So one has to just think about that in every policy decision.
I mean, that is the Pandora's box. If you open that up for one, then it could snowball into other areas.
No, I
unintended.
understand that. I think the development situation is different. I mean, they develop the property, they sell the lots, and people purchasing the lots are people who are wanting the sidewalk, the curb, the gutter, the city services, all these things that are included in the price of their lot that the developer sells to them. They want those things. You know, the problem with these rural subdivisions is they don't want those things. And kind of the fundamental unfairness is that they have to pay for something they don't want. And so what we're struggling with, and I think what most of the concern of all these people has been is, gee, I mean, that's not fair, and how do we as a task force try to address that?
I definitely get a lot of that and agree with it, and I have, you know, listened to a lot of members. Just playing devil's advocate, I will say that there are many times on the city council we vote to put in a sidewalk, to assess a property owner for a sidewalk, and they'll come up and they'll say, we don't want a sidewalk. And we assess them and we make them put it in for the public good. So it's not necessarily good enough to say, well, I don't want it, therefore I don't have to pay for it. And I know you know that, but so it's just.
Danny, maybe you could answer this question. If we came up with a recommendation along the line of the city may take into account additional property tax revenue when determining the assessment to the annexed property. Any issues with that sort of a statement?
No, I don't think so. No issues there.
What's the task? Would you like me to read that again? The city may take into account additional property tax revenue when determining the assessment to the annexed property. At least it's giving us some flexibility to work with the scenarios that we really need to work with.
If you're going to do that, shouldn't you also maybe have a recognition if there's, as you talked about, if there was, by them allowing us to annex and go through their property, that we had some big savings on an infrastructure project? Essentially, if you're helping us to save the city money, we're going to give you a break.
True.
I mean, I don't know how you would word that, but, you know, it's not just a windfall in a property tax. It's also a windfall if we don't have to spend $1 million to go another half a mile with
Maybe the city may take into account additional property tax revenue and other potential cost savings when determining the assessment in the annexed property.
Yeah.
Anybody capture that?
I think that's good. Maybe the city should take into consideration.
Should, shall, must.
I don't agree with the should, must definition, but I think should's optional.
Further discussion. Jim, did you capture that last? Boy, you know, asking me to repeat something 2 times in a row is asking a lot. The city may take into account additional property tax revenue and other potential cost savings when determining the assessment in the annexed property or to the annexed property.
Good.
Consensus? Okay, that does give us the flexibility that we're looking for. All right, thank you very much. I'm glad I wasn't required to repeat that a 3rd time.
Before I go on to the last 2 slides, I'd like to have Albert Schmidt come up here because he just looked up that question about the service cost for the water and sewer.
So based on our engineering team's estimates, we would estimate that the cost to a private property owner to connect their system to the new mains would be, for water, about $26 a lineal foot. And for sewer, we have a large scale that goes from $20 to $150 a foot. And that's large because you try to take into consideration a lot of things. Are you going to have to remove a tree? Are you going underneath sidewalk? What's the elevation change? So pretty conservative number there. If it's a flat area, it's probably closer to the lower portion, but so not the best answer. It's not an exact one, but that's our rough estimate. Obviously, contractors would dictate the actual cost, but based on our experience from previous city contracts, that's what our engineering team has kind of came up with as our rough estimate.
I thought nowadays the sewer and the water run 6 feet under in the same trench. Am I wrong? Why don't both have a huge deviance?
Well, I don't believe you can have, I think there's a minimum difference there where water and sewer, obviously sewer always has to be below water.
Yeah.
And then there's a separation difference there. But yeah, and so they're separate trenches, and typically sewer's in the middle and water is on a shoulder, one side of the road or not.
Oh, really? They're not doing the same trench? I thought they had started doing that. They used to be separate, but
I'm getting a no nod from the director of parks, from Public Works.
Might know.
getting into exciting stuff here.
Hello, Task Force. I'm Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. Typically, when you retrofit sanitary sewer, you could have the main in the street based on the topography of the neighborhood could be deep. And that's typically, when I say it could be deep, anywhere from, say, 13 feet deep down to 20. And then if you can envision, sometimes septic systems are in the back. And if that grade's falling away, we're going to have to set that sanitary sewer in the street deeper so we can actually get it to gravity out. So there's just more challenges on doing those kinds of things. So if you're starting anywhere, say you're starting 15 feet deep, and then you're working your way to the back and then making that connection. Much different with water, because water just needs 6 foot of cover. It's a small pipe.
It's pressurized.
And it's pressurized. And so that's why I think Albert said it very well. There's a big deviation in sanitary sewer costs based on the topography, but water's usually pretty straightforward.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Yep.
And task force members, if I could just go back to the statement that I was hoping I wouldn't have to repeat a third time. I actually have it written down a little bit better, and I'm wondering, I'm trying to think like an attorney, Greg, and that's maybe difficult for me to do and maybe potentially dangerous, but I was wondering if this would bring a little more clarity if we add the words resulting from annexation, and I'll tell you where. The city may take into account additional property tax revenue and other potential cost savings resulting from annexation when determining the assessment to the annexed property. Does that bring more clarity to it, or?
Take into consideration property tax revenues and because revenues aren't a cost saving, so property tax revenues and additional cost savings resulting from the annexation. Is that what you have?
And additional.
Or cost, or just cost savings. You don't need additional.
Okay. Okay. So the city may take into account additional property tax revenues and cost savings resulting from annexation when determining the assessment to the annexed property. Okay, I think that might bring more clarity. And the reason I say that is because we're here today and potentially gone tomorrow or a year from now or 4 years from now, so we would want to have that kind of clarity. And then the same applies to your staff, because these are basically recommendations to guide you as staff. So as there's staff turnover, it would bring more clarity. So when Albert is in your position,
Or whoever.
right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I would, wouldn't it be fair to say that some of these may end up being policies and some of these may make it into ordinance and codified? It just depends on a case-by-case basis.
Yes.
So this will be a report, but it's not the exact language necessarily. Some of these may come, there may be an ordinance that comes out of it to enshrine it essentially. Or there may be a policy inside of your department that's an administrative directive.
Some of it will be policy, some of it would be modifications to our engineering design standards, which is adopted by resolution, so.
Right.
Yeah, or ordinance.
Good point.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, proceed.
So the last area is going back to this question about a cost-benefit analysis prior to a vote on a city-initiated annexation. And what we wanted to do to address that as best as we think we can is we just wanted to go back and repeat what state law currently requires for an annexation study. So if a local jurisdiction is proposing to initiate an annexation, state law has very clear requirements and guidelines and standards for what that process involved. And so the requirements of the study include a description and boundaries of the area potentially to be annexed, to show that there are suitable and ample resources for orderly development of the area, and that would come from the city side. Define a timetable for utility and major street extension into the area, the approximate cost to the property owners, as well as to the municipality. And this is pretty important because we would have to do an analysis of whatever services or improvements are going to be provided to the annexed property, who's going to be paying for those, and what the impact will be to the property owner as well as to the municipality. And then estimate the difference in tax assessments, what that rate is for the property owners. What are they currently paying? And if they were to be annexed, what would that rate be? Demonstrate that if there's any exclusions or irregularities in the boundary lines of the property that's being considered for annexation, that's not the result of arbitrariness. So in other words, a city can't go out and just cherry pick an area that they want to annex and initiate that. We have to show that there's a reasonable present or future need for annexing that contiguous territory. And I think that goes back to some of the triggers that you've already discussed. Illustrate that population and census data indicate that the municipality growth or development is there a word missing on that one? There might be. Municipality growth or development beyond current limits. So we have to show that this goes back primarily to our comprehensive plan, that we're showing that this is an area within our long-range plan or our growth area boundaries. So before I flip the switch, what we've tried to do is, again with you, going back to the policies, the recommendations that you've discussed already, try to hit some of the highlighted public comments that we got. And I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Chair, but I would just say that I recently ran across an article about a municipality in Minnesota that's going through a similar discussion about annexing pockets or islands of land. And the debate that's going on is very similar to our debate, which is the property owners that are being considered for annexation have three concerns. Number one, that they were in the country first and the city grew around them. Second, that they want to protect their rural atmosphere and character and maintain that as much as they can. And third, that they want to minimize any potential future cost impacts to the individuals or the property owners. So I think that's what we've been hearing all along through this process. And I think we've gone a long way in trying to address those concerns by putting together some policies or recommendations that are really going to, I would say, limit the potential for city-initiated annexations. And if we do, there's some pretty stringent requirements that we would have to look at or we would have to defend. So that's my segue, Mr. Chairman, into the last slide that I'll let you go over.
Before you go away, I do know that those last two slides we need to have a discussion on, especially the comment about doing a cost-benefit analysis prior to a vote. And I think you did lay out that there is a very significant study that is already required by state law. And and I can appreciate the thought behind doing a cost-benefit analysis, but in my science background mind, I question how can we do that, because the variable that we cannot possibly eliminate is the location of the property, or in this case maybe the subdivision. In this case, they already have a Sioux Falls address and potentially are benefiting from having a Sioux Falls address versus somebody who lives in Canton, South Dakota, or somebody who lives in Lennox, South Dakota. So it's tough for me to determine how you factor that out of the equation. Any thoughts from the task force members?
Well, if I could ask, so it says it's state law required, there's a study, and it says an approximate cost to the property owner and the municipality of extending services to the area. So that has to be laid out in the report. And I remember reading one where it talks about this is how much it would cost us, and it would cost the landowners, $30,000, and it broke it down. What is the state law guidance, though, in terms of, let's say somebody was being annexed and they objected to their assessment and they said, we think that is excessive. What guidance, or what would the court look at in determining what a fair, equitable assessment is?
Well, the court will look at different factors, but basically what an equitable assessment is the special benefit that particular property derives from the improvement that's being paid for by the assessment. So I think in one of my earlier presentations, I talked about what are some of the special benefits. If there's an increase in value of the real estate, that's the easiest special benefit to show. Certainly if there is an increase, you can show it by an appraisal. If there isn't an increase, you show that by an appraisal as well. Does the improvement allow the property owner to do something else with the property that they normally wouldn't be able to do, whether it's a rezone or gives them some other improvement that they wouldn't otherwise have? Is there an aesthetic improvement that can also be a value? So there's no mathematical equation as to what a special benefit is, and that's always been the difficult part in Supreme Court cases, to determine what is that special benefit. So it's not an easy task to do sometimes.
Be a lot of subjectivity. If it's like, how much is aesthetics worth, or how much is it worth that you have a paved road versus a gravel road?
Correct.
Okay, it's hard to.
Any other thoughts or recommendations on that particular topic?
It's a tough one. I get the idea. I just don't know exactly how you get what the cost benefit is, especially when you're going to have a lot of subjective things. It's not a simple, you do this and your property value goes up, X amount, therefore that's your increase. There's other things that are not really quantifiable.
That is the reality, and
So
I'm wondering if, rather than getting bogged down on that and potentially losing a lot of the headway and the common ground that we have already identified, if we move forward and accept the state law, or the study that it was required by state law, at least to this point, until we have a better answer to that.
I guess I agree with that. I think first of all, I hate to see adding another study on top of a study. And secondly, I always think that benefit analysis is just a non-starter. I don't think that the neighborhoods being annexed see a benefit. You can show them all hey, you're going to get this shiny new sidewalk, curb, gutter, and city sewer system, and they're going to say, no, thank you. So I think it's a great and pretty intensive study that has to be done anyway. So
That is a very good point. It's so subjective. I mean, one party may think that the sidewalk in front of their house is wonderful, and another may think it's, you know, a detriment to their neighborhood because it's changing the character. So how in the world do you come up with a consensus on what that entails? It may be, and I hate to have anybody possibly have to go to court. It could be above our pay grade where if something does come down the line and it's that far outside of the norm, the courts would hopefully rectify that. And, you know, if the assessment was just absurd, that, you know, the court would make the right decision and they could adjust it, and we may have to trust that the process would work.
Okay.
So,
Makes sense.
In agreement,
Yeah.
members? It looks like we've reached consensus on that as well.
Thank you. I would just remind the group again that based on our analysis of the 100 foot of frontage, it's about a third of the cost. So, I mean, in terms of the cost benefit, I think there's some of that would weigh into that discussion as well. Okay, I've been told by our folks that we need to go back and get consensus on these definitions.
That's what I thought we needed to do as well.
Sorry about
too.
that. I skipped
That's
through that
okay.
pretty fast. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn that back to you.
And the definitions, fully development,
Should, And then-
versus must.
impacted, and adjacent versus abutting.
Those are actually found on which pages so we can help to get everybody?
6.
Okay, we're on page 6 and 7.
6 and 7.
Bottom of 6 and the top of 7. Any concerns about the definitions? What was our consensus on should versus must?
it absolutely, it needs to be must.
Must,
Should
yeah.
is ambiguous.
Okay, yeah, we already determined that.
It must be must.
It must be
Or it
must.
should be must. Okay, all right.
Go away.
And in ordinance, it should be shall. But, yeah.
Okay. Are we okay with the terms fully developed and development? Or is that what else we're looking for? What else do we need here?
Yep, and then,
Yes. And then
Impacted.
impacted, adjacent,
yep.
and abutting.
Adjacent is what we currently have.
We'd already decided on adjacent
Yep.
versus abutting.
Can you just hold on this slide for a second? I'm just looking at impacted. The term is meant to So just to clarify, directly influence the available services to a property in the future. Essentially, the CIP project would be something that the land could benefit from. For example, a trunk sewer goes through and it could be potentially hooked up to that sewer.
Yes,
It's something that they could use.
that's a good example, yes.
Okay.
Any concerns about the terminology? It's acceptable as we have defined them now.
Are we talking about impacted?
I think we're talking about fully development. We've
Right,
already
we got that.
determined must.
Must.
Well, can we just agree on this slide and then
Sure,
take a peek at
sure.
the other one if
And then we
that's
can go
okay?
back again.
I'm okay with the impacted definition, and the adjacent and abutting is, and adjacent is the best word to use.
Okay?
For me.
As I am as well.
Yep.
So we have consensus. Now I think we need to go backward. There we go. Fully developed. Any discussion on that definition?
Yeah, this is good because it clarifies that fully developed doesn't mean that there has to be a building on it. If its purpose is to be some sort of parkland or a drainage way, it's fully developed because that's what it's going to be and continue to be. So, and that's where we just needed clarity, and I think it puts it there. So,
Okay, very good. Consensus with the rest of the task force? Okay, I think we have consensus on that as well, too. If you want to go back again, whoops.
This is to you, I'm
Did
done.
we still have, so fully developed and development, so we covered them both?
it looks like development they cut and pasted out of the zoning ordinance or
Yes.
something. So I think it's probably good.
So we're good with development as well. Just wanted to have clarity on that we're good with both of those.
Okay.
Okay, very good. Anything else that we needed to reach consensus on or just confirm consensus on, staff? Okay. Greg Starnes, at this point, what aspects, because we've got some other things that were brought forward by members of the task force, what other aspects might we discuss here? Because we can bring those up on the screen too.
There, well, can we bring them up?
Yes. And we can go through them kind of one at a time if you'd like, because I think some of it we covered here previously.
Oh, I think the first thing is under the recommendation regarding the notifications. Right there. So, and these really are Tina's recommendations, but I think the point was to try to add some objective standards to the notice requirements. And again, I don't know how best to work those into the recommendations, or whether these are internal policy decisions the staff could adopt. And I mean, so I don't think anyone's, if you go to the next page too, there's some specific certain notices within certain years, and and you know, I'm afraid they're so specific you may trip over them, but the idea of some objective notification standards and postings in neighborhoods and things along those lines, I think is worth our consideration.
If we could just, to respond to that first one at the bottom, we do have a process now that we send out notices to property owners on rezoning petitions and conditional use permits. That's a similar process that we could use.
So you're talking about the first bullet point, send notices by regular mail to all residents of impacted neighborhoods. And then the last one there, post all relevant information. It should be on the city website, I believe.
For a petition annexation.
Right.
Yep.
So
the one that we would have difficulty with would be posting a sign in the neighborhood. Okay. We don't really have a sign per se that would fit that category. We have rezoning signs, conditional use permit signs, but we don't have annexation signs.
You know, I think what she was, the idea was to post notice of pre-annexation neighborhood meetings. How are people in neighborhoods notified that there's going to be you know, when you come to talk to them, how do people find out when there's going to be a meeting?
We use neighborhood representatives or a neighborhood association as our contact.
And the other challenge there is, where do you post the sign since it is not city property? You'd have to post it at the entrance or exits on city property if we're talking subdivisions now, or at least near an individual property.
Okay.
Any?
No, I mean, no, we wanted to, I think these are worth throwing out there as
I think what was addressed on page 6, the top slide there, I think much of this, well, you're already stated you're doing the first and last bullet on this page. And the second one, we don't have the authority to post on property that we do not own. So I think your method of using neighborhood associations is possibly the most effective process that you can use. Any other thoughts or suggestions?
On page 6, public input and comments, bullet 3, staff recommends changing it. Why? I know there's some state law, but I would think we could be more restrictive than state law, that which this bullet 3 would propose to do, to send out the certified mail. What was the reasoning for wanting to change that to just staff will testify that that they responded to the notification? And what does responded mean? I mean, you called them and they said, yeah. I mean, I just want to make sure we're.
You want me to go back to that slide?
Yeah, for the benefit of everybody, probably, it would be good.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I would just say real quick, one of the issues that we're dealing with is I'm going to call the 20 and 10 rule. State law says you have to give notice of annexation, of the annexation hearing, no more than 20 days from the hearing date and no less than 10. So we're going to have to do that regardless. So if you want to do additional notice on top of that, just incorporate that into your recommendation. But just know, we're for sure going to have to give certified notice no less than 20 days before, no less than 10. No more than 20, no less than 10.
I forget what's certified or registered. Does either one have like a proof of delivery? Or can that be made to happen?
There is the possibility to get proof of delivery, but proof of delivery is probably not going to occur within 20 days, because when you do certified mail return receipt requested, because that's really when you get your proof of delivery, that can take more than 20 days. So we don't have enough time to get that done within that state requirement unless we just do certified mail return receipt requested earlier in the process and just do it again later.
Certified, does that at least get you an assertion by the Postal Service that they delivered it?
It tells you that it's been delivered and it's been mailed, and an attempt for delivery's either been made or it has been delivered.
Okay. And then if you required a return receipt, if I didn't want to be annexed, could I just refuse to sign the form and hamstring the city?
Yeah,
Because there's no return receipt?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, if you get served a return receipt requested letter in the mail and you never go and sign for it or return the receipt, then at some point the city will get notification that you never returned it, because they'll go out a couple times to try to serve you that letter. And then if it never gets served, it gets sent back, but it could be 30, 45 days later.
So later somebody could as like some sort of an appeal or something say, I didn't get the letter. So that could be the challenge of requiring signatures.
Right.
Seems like bullet 3 actually puts a little more, or the bottom of this particular slide where it says bullet 3, staff recommends change to staff will testify at the annexation hearing that the property owner responded to the notification. I mean, it seems like it puts more teeth into the process, that they have to testify that, yes, they did respond, not just, yes, the letter was sent.
Yeah, I think the thought process behind that is when you're dealing with bigger neighborhoods, there's going to be an association, there's going to be a contact. Word of mouth works a lot better, so there's kind of a built-in process of getting notification out there. But maybe when you're just dealing with one owner or two owners and it's smaller, that word of mouth might not spread as much. So requiring staff to come before city council to say, on a city-initiated annexation, we reached out to these folks and we know they know about this meeting because we did X, Y, and Z. Now, X, Y, and Z might be different for every occasion, or might be the same notification that they try to do. But somebody might come up and said, I talked to Betty and she said she didn't want to come, and at least that'll be on the record. Or somebody might come up and say, I met with them at the coffee shop, and they didn't want to be here, and at least that'll be on the record. And so if it goes forward and that in fact didn't happen, at least there'll be a record of what we tried to do, and there'll be testimony from us so you guys can feel confident that there was contact made.
But regardless of whatever that we decide, state law says that everybody affected is going to get a certified letter, period, end of issue.
It'll say, it says if it's your property, you'll get a certified letter. So if you're a neighbor, you're not.
The owner.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a tenant, maybe, no, but.
State law requires that it be mailed by certified mail.
Okay.
That doesn't necessarily mean that person gets it. Because if they're out of the country, it could sit in their mailbox and maybe they never get it.
Sure. Well, we have the same problem with rezonings and conditional use permits and anything that requires notification, so.
To bring clarity to this now, again, so the task force, is it in consensus that bullet 3, the staff recommendation to change, staff recommends change to staff will testify at the annexation hearing that the property owner responded to the notification, that we are in agreement on that.
That was really helpful. I think that was a good explanation. That makes sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
So we do definitely have consensus with that as well. Okay. Then moving forward, where we left off.
Go to the next one.
We go to the next slide.
The suggestion about
There we go.
the time frame. The point of clarification on this is that we have a 5-year capital program that the city council reviews on an annual basis. And so first of all, there's nothing programmed beyond 5 years. And even within that 5-year plan, once you get out to that 4th or 5th year, it could be changed. So in most cases, if there's a capital project that we would want to visit with the neighbors about, it's going to be something within more of a 1 to 3 year timeline.
The only thing that's really, in our CIP, the only thing that really matters is the first year, frankly.
It is.
Everything else is kind of a plan, but they can slip for a lot of reasons. The first year is really the only thing we're really kind of,
Now, I mean, we do a 5-year CIP, but it's changing yearly.
in this austere budget environment, we have several things that are slipping that were going to be done in 18, and now they've been pushed to 20 or 22 or whatever, so.
Is it safe to say, Director Cooper, that, I mean, when you know something is definitely going to be planned, that you're going to reach out at the earliest possible time?
Yes, that would be our recommendation as part of this process. And I'm looking back at one of our other slides that we had that language in there under communication. Just a second.
Excuse me.
It's this slide, Jim, right here. I'll flip this. Whoops. Sorry about the delay here. Okay, the bottom bullet on this slide is intended to address that communication. Initiate proactive meetings regarding future road projects and large developments. And that would be that 1 or 2 year capital program that, whether the property is in the city limits or not in the city limits, that would be our protocols to go out and have discussions with property owners.
Okay, is the task force in agreement that this particular section dealing with communication is addressed well with what we've covered on page 6, the top slide on page 6? Is there any other slide? I'm just looking, it looks like it's the top slide on page 6 of the presentation.
I'm looking for approval on that.
Well, just consensus that we should, that these points are addressed the best that we legally can do and possibly do in terms of the information that's available, reliably, I should say, available.
Talking about what's on their page 2 or what we see on the screen, because it's two
Well,
different things.
it would have been the previous screen and this one. On the typed notes that I sent to you, it'd be that last bottom part on the bottom of page 2, and then the top part on page 3 of our handout. You know, above the final issue there.
I think that looks fine.
Greg and Matt,
I'm fine.
fine. And Councilor Neitzer?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got consensus, so we can move on to the last part, which we potentially have dealt with at least some of this. The financial impact of annexation on property owners is too great, and recommendation. Greg, do you want to go over this?
I think go to the next one, because we talked about analyzing the tax revenues. And go to the next one. Oh, no, sorry, back up. So this is the second bullet point there is something that somebody from the public brought up at one of the earlier meetings, that the assessments, the idea, this concept that assessments should be capped at a percentage of the assessed value of the property owner's property. The idea that provides some certainty and some consistency and some fairness to the process. It allows the city something to be able to, when they're talking to property owners, to say, rather than $26 per foot and no one knows how many feet it's going to be to no one knows what, you know, instead of having to be a mathematician to figure out what the potential cost of an annexation is going to be, to say, this is how we're going to determine it, but it's not going to be more than X percent of the assessed value of your property. So a small $120,000 house on a huge corner lot isn't going to be assessed disproportionately to his $300,000 home neighbor with a small area bordering the street. So I thought this was an interesting idea, and I think it's worth discussing and determining whether or not it's reasonable to look at that. So somebody if it was 5%, somebody with a $200,000 house with an assessed value of $200,000, the maximum assessment on an annexation for infrastructure would be $10,000 if we use 5%. So I wanted to at least bring that up for conversation.
Okay, I did some quick math too, which is kind of dangerous, but if you go back to that analysis that we did of a typical urban assessment versus the rural standard, if you have a property that has $150,000 assessed valuation, and you take that times 5%, that's $7,500. And we estimated for a 100-foot frontage that cost for the water and sewer was going to be about $8,500. So we're pretty close to that range. Now, that doesn't include the connection to the house, but that's the main water and sewer mains. So I think, again, from our vantage point, by adopting those minimum standards, we are getting closer to that goal of what we've heard from the public.
Yeah, no, I haven't, my math skills aren't that good, but, you know, through the course of the last few, you know, months, now it's been, you know, the people have come up and thrown out some very high numbers at us that, you know, they think that their assessment amount is going to be, and you know, it seems as if we want to prevent that somehow. That's, I mean, again, I'm going to get back to that kind of being the fundamental unfairness in the process. But maybe this does address that. I don't know.
And the statement that we had adopted earlier, kind of here just this evening, and that's the city may take into account additional property tax revenues and cost savings resulting from annexation, determining the assessment to the annexed property. I think that helps to address that issue as well. There's no doubt that there's been significant, I think, give as to city policies with their engineering standards at this point, resulting in that potential savings and also resulting in, I think, what might be most important to people is that they can maintain their quality of living as they have it today. You know, that rural environment that they like versus being inside the city with curb, gutter, and sidewalk. Any other comments from task force members?
I think that was well put.
Matt? Okay. Greg?
No. I
Greg?
made my pitch.
I know we're not done with this section here, but
No, I don't think there's anything else.
I'm not sure. I think when we started this process 8 meetings ago that we were trying to knock out recommendations. Basically, what we're trying to do is knock out recommendations we're going to bring forward to the city council that they can then recommend to the city staff on how to proceed. I don't know that when we started that we realistically thought we were going to resolve every single issue at this point in time, especially considering that in 7 or 8 months, we're going to also have a change of administration as well. That could have an impact one way or the other. I'm not sure. I don't have a crystal ball on that. So I'm personally of the belief that we've made some pretty significant progress at this point, especially, you know, I'm not at that last page closing comments, but especially where this administration has stated the city's not recommending any large-scale city-initiated annexation such as rural neighborhood at this time. And I can say that's true with this particular city administration, and I think I'm going out on the limb a little bit, councilors, so you can help me with this, but I think it may also apply to our current city council too, which will have some change in the future. 2 members for sure.
I would say that's true with the current members, yes.
So I would say I'm a little conflicted because on the one hand, there's been a lot of concessions by the city to drive the cost down. That being said, I think I know where they're going because I think perhaps the biggest issue that I kept hearing was really about a devastating assessment where the ratios were just so far out of whack that I had, you know, maybe a $100,000 assessment on a $250,000 property, something that's just going to bury you. And I think 5% is probably way too low. I don't know if a magic percentage solves it, but I think that's probably where, when I would get phone calls and talk to people, it was just that fear that you're going to push me out of my home. And, you know, so I definitely, you know, if there's some way in which that could be addressed, that would be wonderful. I don't know what the magic number, or if there is a magic number, though, you know. But I think that's what they're going for, that you know, maybe we're going to have to pay something, but it's not going to be so much that it's so far out of whack that I'm elderly and I've now been basically shoved out of my home, or the assessment is so large that there's no possible way I'm going to sell this home. So I think that's what you're going for.
Right, and maybe we do the same thing, that, you know, the city may take into consideration or should take into consideration the assessed value of a homeowner's home, so to prevent a disproportionate assessment for infrastructure. I don't know how best to word that, but something along those lines, so at least we establish the concept or the idea that it shouldn't be disproportionate, because there's a lot of people who have been afraid of that. I mean, really worried about that, that this is going to be devastating, and maybe that's how to address it.
Yeah, maybe rather than binding. It seems dangerous to bind, you know, to a percentage, but because you don't know, each project is going to be different, but maybe something where there's some direction that we need to consider the, you know, does the, compared to the property value, is the assessment, you know, out of whack, and there might be some subjectivity to that, but.
Could you repeat that again? And Jim, maybe if you or somebody, Albert or Deborah, if you could write that down. Could you repeat your statement again, Greg? Now I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I don't think I'm going to say it the same way.
Times.
The city may or shall or should take into consideration the assessed value of a property owner's or property in determining the total assessment to prevent there being a disproportionately, an assessment that is disproportionately large in comparison to the assessed value of their home. How about, I mean,
A common sense clause of some sort. I mean, right now, if, let's say something like that happened, you annex something and something out of whack like that came up. My house is worth $250 and they're getting charged $100,000. Where would they go? What would happen?
Would that more or less be just a legislative body decision?
Well, the bigger question would be, who on the council is going to vote for that?
Well, yeah, that's just.
Yeah,
I wouldn't.
Did you have a?
Well, I was just going to say, you know, if you're going to annex somebody in that annexation study, you'd have to put forth in that annexation study how you're going to pay for those improvements, and you're going to put in there, we're going to assess these folks this amount of money. Then that annexation conceivably is going to be approved through the annexation process, which requires two hearings, right? So let's just say you were annexed, and then those assessments were going to be done because those public improvements were going to be made in the future. Then a separate process, the assessment process, would have to occur, and then there would be a hearing where there'd have to be a resolution of necessity for the assessment, which a person could appear at and say, hey, this is way too much because my house is only worth this much. You're trying to assess me this much. And then city council could hear that information and make a determination as to whether they want to assess less, keep it the same, or not assess at all. And then if that assessment went through at that first hearing, that person, that property owner, if it was just one person, could appeal that, and it could come back again to the city council where a supermajority would have to approve it. If the supermajority approved that assessment amount, then at some point there'd be another hearing at an assessment roll hearing where that value would have to be approved again by the city council, where a property owner could come in again, say the same things or additional information as to why that assessment's out of whack. And then once it was passed at that hearing, that same person could, within 20 days, appeal that assessment amount to the circuit court. And that would be, where they would probably find their relief. If they didn't do any of those things, and 2 or 3 years later they thought the assessment that's been levied on my property is way too high, there is a city ordinance that allows them to make application within 4 years of when that assessment would be delinquent, within that time frame, to come back to city council and say, this assessment that was put in all those years ago was unjust or was inequitable, or it should be reduced for these reasons. And potentially the city council could listen to them and adjust it at that point. So those are kind of the ways that someone could go about protesting or contesting their assessment amount.
So does this statement basically restate some of the protections that are already provided in South Dakota law?
I think it does. It does.
And would you see any harm in also, this puts you on the spot, including that as a recommendation coming from this task force?
Are you asking me how I feel about legally putting a percentage on what the assessment amount should be?
Is there there's not any violation of law or any reason why it couldn't be done?
No, there isn't a reason why it couldn't be done.
No, thank you.
But you might want to consider there's maybe situations where somebody wants to be annexed, but the city doesn't necessarily want to annex them, or there's some other major catastrophe or some reason that a certain property needs to be annexed and this forcible annexation process needs to occur, but maybe the city doesn't have the money to pay for it. And so they may need to assess more than 5 or 10% based on just the available funds that the city has. So setting it can't exceed may not work for every scenario. And as a lawyer, you always want to have an exception to the rule. It just works for everybody, I think.
Thank you.
Yes,
no, I was looking, okay. Okay, task force. It's in our hands.
So we have
How do you want to proceed?
We have the, so we did we agree on his verbiage as far as?
Did you capture that, Albert?
Not a percentage, but just the guidance essentially?
Yeah, consider assessed value of property to prevent disproportionate cost to property owners.
Perfect.
Something like that, yeah.
Okay.
Is that pretty close?
Yeah, that's exactly, yeah.
And are we good with that as a task force? It sounds like we have a consensus on that issue to include that as a recommendation as well. Very good. Greg, does that cover the other issues? Is that kind of an all-encompassing?
I see there's one other on here, and again, this is, I wish Jeff were here to kind of run through his logic, but analyze the impact of proposed developments on the infrastructure costs of annexation to adjacent neighborhoods and seek to spread the costs equitably between the new development and the adjacent neighborhoods. I think that the idea was that maybe the developers of a new development should bear some of the cost that their new development results in an existing neighborhood. Does that make sense? If you have a new development in the neighborhood, you're going to have to run infrastructure through that the development should share in that cost, or it should be somehow averaged between all the homeowners, the new and the old.
So your understanding would be if a developer wants to do a big commercial development on the other side of an existing rural subdivision, and therefore that's going to trigger an annexation, that maybe the developer should have some skin in the game in the improvements in that neighborhood? Is that?
Or is it the reference of running utilities
Well,
through the existing?
Right, and
development?
I think it's a matter of averaging the cost, looking at the infrastructure cost of the new development and what that means to the existing neighborhood, and then figuring out an average amount per household. Again, I think maybe that's what his neighborhood's dealing with. I'm not positive, so.
I'm not certain that I have a lot of ease with that particular thought. I'm not sure that I have a total understanding of it either, unfortunately.
Nor do I, so I'm a bad spokesman.
Okay. Well, may I recommend that possibly that is something that is pursued in the future versus trying to deal with something that we're not in complete understanding of.
Yes.
Was there anything else, Greg, then?
No.
Then I think, if I'm not mistaken, staff and Mr. David, I think we have reached consensus on all the necessary items within our task force recommendations. So I think that does bring us up to the last page of the presentation. And I'm looking at the clock. I can't believe it. It's 3 minutes to 7. Who would have thought it was going to come in right on time? But I just want to reiterate again what I'd stated earlier. The city is not recommending any large-scale city-initiated annexations such as rural neighborhoods at this time. Really, our next step is to take it to City Council, and City staff had sent me a message earlier that November 21st information session is wide open, because on our going back to our agenda, it states action items November present report to City Council for consideration. So November 21st info is wide open. Our November 7th is already full, and the November 14th already has 2 items, so I don't think that would be a good date to do it. Is the 7th the first meeting of the month? So the 4th, let me get into November. Looking at that 4th Tuesday, that's the 28th. Was there anything? It looks like 21 is wide open, though, so we go with the sure thing. So my recommendation would be that we would bring our report to City Council on November the 21st. Are we in agreement on that?
Would it be an informational, or also an informational and a report, an official report at the City Council meeting at 7 to, present it? How does that work?
I think it would be at the informational.
Informational?
Jim David, and by the way, introduce yourself to the group, because Jim David has, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Yep, Jim David, Operations Manager for the City Council. Really, it's the determination of the City Council. So if the item is presented at the informational and the council decides that they want to have an official report, that could come forward as a resolution, and simply the council accept receipt of the report. It's really up to the rest of the council how they would like to move forward. But the initial step would be the informational meeting on the 21st, if that works with everybody.
And that is a good point. I don't know that we want to overstep our bounds here. I mean, as a task force, we can make a lot of recommendations, but we potentially can't make that recommendation for the City Council. We could at the time of the informational as to how to proceed forward, or maybe even float the idea prior to that too, to get an idea, because we'd have to have it on the agenda that evening. I mean, at this point in time, Director Cooper, I mean, if it went to the informational on the 21st, and then it went to, if any aspect of it needed to go to a city council meeting, a 7 o'clock city council meeting.
The first meeting would be the first meeting in December.
Right. Or
The first Tuesday.
any meeting at that point
Yeah.
in December. I would think let's do the 21st informational and then kind of take it from there as to how we proceed based on recommendations.
I would agree, because
Council.
again, some of it may be deciding to run with it and make some of it ordinance and some of it to make a resolution. or
Absolutely.
whatever. So
In fact, it might even need a follow-up informational
Yeah.
before we even get to that point.
Okay.
All right, well, that concludes our final, and Counselor Selberg, I know that you need to get going, so if you would like to go ahead, but I would like to first thank Counselor Selberg and Counselors Neitzer and Greg and Matt, you know, especially, well, all of us. We have other full-time jobs, and tonight was a good indication of how our full-time jobs impact our lives, just like they do yours. And the commitment that these individuals up here have made these past several months since April, eight meetings and a lot of time in between. I greatly appreciate your time and your effort and your service to all of these individuals as well as to the city staff. And Jim David, who you just saw a moment ago, he's kind of an unsung hero. He's an individual who does puts in countless hours of work behind the scenes and is never up in front getting any recognition for it. So Jim, I thank you for your efforts. And Deborah and Albert, if you two would stand up too. These are other city staff members that you've seen Albert some up here at the podium, but Deborah is another unsung hero who has put in countless hours behind the scenes working on this and helping us to get to this point in time. So I thank you, as well as Danny Brown and Director Cooper and Director Cotter, if he's here, and Chad Heavey and some of the others that participated along the way. But most importantly, thank you for your commitment of time and your comments throughout this entire process. We look forward to the informational meeting on November 21st. Unless any of the task force members have any final comments of their own?
I would echo that, and I would just say, you know, I think especially the citizens, part of our group here, for donating their time and their input, I think that was really helpful. I mean, I think we've moved the needle on a difficult issue with absolutely no easy answers. I think we've moved it down the road a bit too, but thank you to them and all the citizens for your participation and feedback. I think we've got some perfect attendance at these meetings by a number of people I see out here, so obviously you can tell people feel strongly. So.
And boy, I would really be remiss if I did not thank Tina Haraldson and Jeff Davis, who could not be with us this evening too, for obviously they're part of the task force, but they put in as much time as the rest of us, and so we thank all members of the task force, staff, and the community. So we look forward to our November 21st meeting. This meeting is adjourned.